The escape pod shuddered violently as it entered Varkona 7's turbulent atmosphere, its hull plating glowing cherry red from the friction. Inside, Dr. Mara Kane gripped her harness with white knuckles, her gaze fixed on the rapidly approaching surface of what many spacefarers called the most dangerous planet in the Outer Rim. "Artemis 9 to any receiving stations," Jax Ryland shouted into the comms system, his voice barely audible over the screaming of the damaged thrusters. "Mayday! Mayday! We're going down on Varkona 7. Coordinates." He glanced at the flickering navigation console. "Hell, coordinates unknown. We need immediate extraction." Only static answered him. Mara wasn't surprised. No one in their right mind maintained listening posts near Varkona 7. The planet's reputation as a death world had been well earned over decades of failed colonization attempts. "Brace for impact," Jax called, abandoning the comms to grip the manual controls, his scarred hands working frantically to level their descent. The pod slammed into the planet's surface, skipping like a stone across a lake before crashing through a copse of iridescent trees and finally embedding itself in a hillside. For several moments, only the hiss of ruptured cooling systems and the tick of contracting metal broke the silence. Mara coughed, tasting blood. Her vision swam as she fumbled with her harness release. "Jax?" she called weakly. A groan from the pilot's seat answered her. "Still here," he muttered. "Though I'm not sure that's good news." He wrestled free of his own restraints and stood unsteadily, checking the wound on his forehead. "We're on Varkona 7. We might have survived the crash, but this planet will kill us in hours." Mara rose shakily to her feet, her exobiologist's training already assessing their situation. "We need to take stock of our supplies and secure the immediate area," she said, pulling a medkit from under her seat and applying a quick seal bandage to Jax's head wound. "Secure the area?" Jax gave a bitter laugh. "On Varkona? Might as well try to secure a supernova." Nevertheless, he checked his sidearm and moved toward the pod's emergency hatch, which had been partially torn away in the crash. The air that rushed in was surprisingly sweet, rich with alien scents of nectar and ozone. Mara inhaled deeply, finding it breathable, if slightly thicker than Earth standard. She followed Jax to the hatch, where he stood rigid, his weapon drawn. "Sweet mercy," he whispered. The landscape before them seemed designed by a mind both beautiful and cruel. Towering trees with trunks of deep indigo supported canopies that shifted from emerald to sapphire depending on the angle of the twin sun walls overhead. Carpets of silver-veined moss covered the ground, occasionally interrupted by clusters of pulsing, bioluminescent fungi. In the distance, floating creatures that resembled jellyfish drifted on thermal currents, their translucent bodies catching and refracting sunlight into prismatic beams. But beauty wasn't what had captured Jax's attention. Barely 50 meters from their crash site, a massive creature lay on its side, evidently injured. Its body was roughly the size of an Earth elephant, covered in plates of natural armor that shimmered with internal bioluminescence. 6 powerful limbs ended in claws that could easily disembowel a human, and its elongated head housed rows of crystalline teeth. "That's a Cavix," Jax whispered, raising his weapon. "Apex predator. They're why the Persephone outpost fell. One of those things can take out a dozen armed colonists." Mara placed a gentle hand on his arm. "It's injured," she said quietly, "probably from debris from our crash." "Good," Jax replied coldly. "One less threat to worry about." Before he could say more, Mara stepped out of the pod and began walking toward the wounded creature. Jax's curses followed her, but she continued her approach, maintaining a steady, calm pace. "Have you lost your mind?" Jax hissed, scrambling after her but keeping his distance from the Cavix. "Those things killed over 200 colonists." Mara ignored him, her focus entirely on the wounded predator. As she drew closer, she could see the damage. A piece of the pod's hull had sliced through the creature's armored hide. exposing pulsing internal organs that glowed with the same bioluminescence as its exterior. Its breathing was labored, and its 6 eyes, arranged in a circle around its skull, followed her movement with an intelligence that sent a shiver down her spine. She stopped 3 meters away, then slowly crouched down to appear less threatening. The Kavix made a sound, somewhere between a growl and a purr, and attempted to rise, only to collapse again with a pained whine. "It's okay," Mara said softly, knowing the creature couldn't understand her words, but hoping her tone might convey her intent. "I'm not here to hurt you." To Jax's visible horror, she extended her hand, palm up, toward the Kavix. The creature regarded her for a long moment, all 6 eyes blinking in an unsynchronized pattern. Then, with agonizing slowness, it stretched its neck forward and gently, impossibly gently for a creature of its size and reputation, nuzzled her palm with the tip of its snout. Jax's weapon clattered to the ground. That's not possible," he stammered. "Those things are killing machines. They tore through reinforced barriers at Persephone. They tracked and hunted colonists for sport." Mara turned to him, a small, knowing smile playing at her lips. "They say on Earth that you've survived some of the most dangerous predators in the galaxy," she said. "Siberian tigers, Amazonian anacondas, Australian box jellyfish." She stroked the Kavix's snout, her smile widening as the creature made a sound remarkably like a contented sigh. "You met the friendly ones." The twin suns of Varkona 7 cast long, eerie shadows as they began their descent toward the horizon. Mara and Jax had spent the hours since their crash salvaging what they could from the escape pod: emergency rations, water purifiers, medical supplies, and a portable shelter generator. Throughout their work, the wounded Kavix had remained nearby, occasionally making soft chirping sounds that seemed almost inquisitive. "We should name it," Mara said as she sorted through a container of emergency medical supplies. Jax looked up from the communications array he was attempting to repair. "Name it? It's not a pet. Dr. Kane. It's an apex predator on the most dangerous planet in charted space." "Her," Mara corrected, glancing at the Kavix. "And names help us form connections. Connections might keep us alive here." Jax sighed, wiping sweat from his brow. "Fine, call it whatever you want, but don't come crying to me when your new friend decides you look like dinner." Mara approached the Kavix, who had been watching their activities with evident curiosity. "I think I'll call you Artemis," she said softly. "After our ship." The creature's bioluminescent hide pulsed briefly, as if in acknowledgement. "You really think you can communicate with that thing?" Jax asked, his tone skeptical but no longer hostile. "I think," Mara replied carefully, "that we've misunderstood a great deal about Varkona 7 and its inhabitants." She gestured toward the jungle around them. "Look at this place. Yes, it's dangerous. Most wilderness is. But it's also beautiful," Jax finished unexpectedly. When Mara looked at him in surprise, he shrugged. "I've been to 37 planets. Doctor, I know beauty when I see it. Doesn't mean it won't kill you." As if to emphasize his point, a nearby plant suddenly unfurled, revealing luminous tendrils that whipped toward a small, rodent-like creature that had ventured too close. The tendrils wrapped around the animal with lightning speed, lifting it into a central maw hidden among the plant's leaves. The creature's desperate squeals were mercifully brief. "Carnivorous flora," Mara noted clinically. "Fascinating evolutionary adaptation." "Fascinating," Jax echoed incredulously. "That thing just ate something alive. And you're taking notes?" Mara's expression sobered. "My daughter would have loved this place," she said quietly. "Ellie was always drawn to dangerous beauty." The sudden personal revelation caught Jax off guard. "You have a daughter?" "Had," Mara corrected, her voice soft but steady. "She died 3 years ago. Shuttle crash on Proxima Centauri's fourth moon. She was studying the predator species there, much like the Cervix. She looked at Artemis, who had closed her eyes but seemed to be listening. Ellie believed that what we call monsters are often just creatures we don't understand yet. The revelation hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge of shared vulnerability. Jax opened his mouth as if to offer condolences, then closed it again, returning his attention to the communications array. "Sun's setting," he said instead. "We should set up the shelter before nightfall. Varcona's nocturnal predators are supposedly even worse than the daytime variety." As if on cue, distant howls echoed through the jungle, haunting, multi-toned calls that sent chills down their spines. Artemis's eyes snapped open, and she made a low, rumbling sound in her throat. "Is she warning us?" Jax asked, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. "I think so," Mara replied. "Come on, let's get that shelter up." Working quickly, they activated the shelter generator, which projected a geodesic dome of energy around their crash site. The semi-transparent barrier would keep out smaller creatures and provide some protection from the elements, though Mara doubted it would stop a determined Cervix or other large predator. To their surprise, Artemis dragged herself to the edge of the dome's perimeter before they activated it, positioning herself just outside the barrier. "She's guarding us," Mara said with quiet wonder. Jax frowned, or waiting for the shield to fail so she can have an easy meal. As darkness fell completely, the jungle transformed. Bioluminescent plants and fungi began to glow with increasing intensity, bathing the landscape in ghostly blues, purples, and greens. Flying creatures with glowing wings darted through the canopy, while larger shapes moved in the shadows beyond their sight. Inside their shelter, Mara and Jax ate a sparse meal of emergency rations, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Jax broke the silence. "You mentioned your daughter," he said hesitantly. "Is that why you're here? On Artemis 9? Mara nodded. "After Ellie died, I couldn't bear to stay in academia, teaching theories about alien psychology from the safety of Earth. I needed to see these creatures for myself, to understand them the way she tried to." "So you joined a deep space survey mission?" Jax's tone suggested he found this an extreme response to grief. "I joined to prove something," Mara said. "Not just to the scientific community, but to myself. That we can coexist with species we consider dangerous. That fear, not inherent violence, is the root of most conflicts between humans and alien life." She looked out at Artemis, whose bioluminescent hide glowed softly in the darkness. "What about you? What brought a veteran scout like you to Artemis 9? Jax's expression hardened. "Money," he said flatly. "Simple as that." But Mara had spent enough time studying subtle cues in alien body language to recognize evasion in her own species. "Is it?" she pressed gently. For a long moment, Jax was silent, his gaze fixed on the weapon in his lap. "I lost my squad," he finally said, his voice rough. "On Taros Prime, xenomorphs that looked like harmless vegetation until they weren't. I was point scout, should have spotted the signs. I didn't." His fingers tightened around his weapon. 8 good people died because I missed what was right in front of me." "I'm sorry," Mara said simply. Jax shrugged, the gesture failing to convey the indifference he clearly intended. "Command cleared me of responsibility, but—" he trailed off. "Anyway, after that, I couldn't stay in the Colonial Marines. Took up private contracting. The Artemis 9 mission paid well, and the risk assessment said we wouldn't make planetfall on any death worlds." He gave a bitter laugh. "So much for risk assessments. Outside their shelter." Artemis raised her massive head, all 6 eyes scanning the darkness. A low, warning growl rumbled from her throat. "Something's coming," Jax said, instantly alert. He moved to the edge of the dome, peering into the bioluminescent-lit jungle. At first, Mara saw nothing. Then, movement. A ripple of displaced vegetation. Too coordinated to be wind. Artemis struggled to rise, her injured side clearly causing her pain, but she positioned herself between the approaching threat and the human shelter. "More Kaviks," Mara whispered as the shapes emerged from the jungle. 3 Kaviks, each as large as Artemis, stepped into the clearing around their crash site. Their hides pulsed with bioluminescence. Patterns rippling across their armored plates in what Mara suspected was a form of communication. All 18 eyes, 6 per creature, focused first on Artemis, then on the shelter containing the humans. "If they rush us at once, the shelter won't hold," Jax said, his voice tense but controlled. "I've got 15 shots in this weapon. Maybe enough for one of them." Artemis made a series of complex sounds, chirps, growls, and harmonic tones beyond human vocal capability. The 3 newcomers responded in kind, their hide lights pulsing in synchronized patterns. "They're communicating," Mara said, fascination temporarily overriding her fear. "Yeah, probably discussing how to divide us up for dinner," Jax muttered, but he didn't raise his weapon. To their astonishment, the 3 Kaviks settled onto the ground around Artemis, forming a protective circle that enclosed both her and, by extension, the human shelter. One of them, slightly larger than the others, with a distinctive scar across its back, gently nuzzled Artemis's wounded side, making a soft trilling sound. "They're caring for her," Mara said in wonder. "They're a social species." Jax lowered his weapon slightly. "This goes against everything in the Persephone reports. The colonists described them as merciless killers." "Maybe," Mara suggested. "It depends on how you approach them." As they watched, the largest of the newcomers rose and cautiously approached the energy dome. It stopped just short of the barrier, its 6 eyes blinking in that unsynchronized pattern Mara had noticed earlier. Then, to her amazement, it lowered its massive head to the ground in what appeared to be a gesture of submission or peace. "I think," Mara said slowly, "they want us to know we're under their protection." Jax shook his head in disbelief. "Or they're waiting for us to lower our guard." "There's one way to find out," Mara replied. And before Jax could stop her, she deactivated a small section of the energy dome and stepped outside. "Mara, don't!" Jax hissed, but she was already standing in the open, less than 2 meters from the massive Kaviks. Heart pounding. Mara maintained eye contact with the creature, or as much eye contact as one could make with a being possessing 6 independently moving eyes. She slowly extended her hand, palm up, as she had done with Artemis. The Kaviks regarded her for what felt like an eternity. Then, with the same gentle care she had witnessed earlier, it pressed its snout against her palm. Its hide was warm, almost hot to the touch, and pulsed with bioluminescence that seemed to intensify at the point of contact. A strange sensation washed over Mara, a feeling of curious welcome tinged with protective concern. The feeling was so distinct, so clearly not her own emotional state, that she gasped aloud. "What's wrong?" Jax called from inside the shelter, his weapon raised again. "Nothing," Mara said breathlessly. I think they're empathic, or at least projecting emotions somehow." She stroked the Kaviks' snout, and the feeling of welcome intensified. "It's incredible." Jax watched the scene with undisguised amazement. After a moment of hesitation, he stepped through the gap in the energy dome to join Mara. The Kaviks tensed slightly at his approach, but didn't retreat. "Easy," Mara murmured, though whether to Jax or the Kaviks wasn't entirely clear. "No one here wants violence." Slowly, Jax extended his hand as Mara had done. The Kaviks hesitated longer with him, perhaps sensing his lingering fear or distrust, but eventually, It pressed its snout against his palm as well. Jax's eyes widened. "It feels, see, like it's in your head," Mara supplied. "I think they communicate emotionally, at least in part." The Kavix withdrew from Jax and returned to its companions, settling beside Artemis, who had been watching the interaction with what Mara could only interpret as approval. "We should get some rest," Mara said, suddenly aware of her exhaustion. "I think we're safe for tonight." Jax nodded slowly, his worldview visibly shifting. "I'll take first watch anyway," he said. Old habits. As they returned to their shelter, reclosing the energy barrier, Mara's scientific mind was already racing with questions and hypotheses. If the Kavix were indeed empathic, capable of sensing and perhaps influencing emotions, it would explain so much about the reports from Persephone Outpost. Fear begetting fear. Aggression met with aggression. A tragic spiral of misunderstanding escalated by empathic feedback. Outside, the four Kavix arranged themselves in a protective circle around the human shelter, their bioluminescent hides pulsing in slow, rhythmic patterns that seemed almost like a lullaby. Morning on Varkona 7 brought new wonders and new dangers. Mara awoke to find Jax already outside the shelter, kneeling beside Artemis. To her astonishment, he appeared to be treating the Kavix's wound with supplies from their medical kit. "The antiseptic properties should work on her biology," he was saying, his tone professional but gentle. "The cellular structure of most carbon-based life forms has similar enough basics." Mara approached quietly, not wanting to disturb what felt like a significant moment. "How is she asked when Jax finally noticed her presence. "Better than she should be," he replied. "These creatures have remarkable regenerative abilities. The wound that would have killed a human is already closing." He applied a final layer of synthetic skin to the injury. "Still, this should help prevent infection." The other three Kavix had disappeared, but Mara wasn't concerned. Somehow, she knew they hadn't gone far. "You've changed your tune," she observed. Jax stood, wiping his hands on a sterile cloth. "Let's just say I'm reassessing my assumptions." He gestured toward the jungle. "While you were sleeping, I saw them hunting. It was..." He searched for the right word. "Humbling. They took down something that looked like a cross between a rhino and a tank. But they did it cleanly. No cruelty, no excess. Just survival." "Nature isn't cruel," Mara said. "Only efficient." "Yeah, well, tell that to my dead squad," Jax replied, a flash of his old bitterness returning. He sighed. "Sorry. Old wounds." Mara nodded, understanding more than she let on. "We need to find water today, and possibly shelter more permanent than our energy dome. The generator will only last another 2 days at most." "I spotted what might be ruins about 2 clicks east of here," Jax said. "Could be part of the Persephone outpost. Might have supplies, maybe even a working communications array." The plan made sense, but Mara hesitated. "What about Artemis? She's still recovering." As if understanding the conversation, Artemis struggled to her feet, testing her injured side. She seemed steady enough, if not at full strength. "I think she wants to come with us," Jax said, a hint of amusement in his voice. They gathered what supplies they could carry, collapsed the energy dome, and set off toward the east, Artemis lumbering alongside them like an otherworldly guard dog. The jungle was alive with activity in the daylight, floating seed pods that resembled miniature jellyfish, lizard-like creatures with too many limbs scurrying up tree trunks, and birds, or something bird-adjacent, with translucent wings that caught the sunlight like stained glass. Mara documented everything she could with her portable scanner, her scientific curiosity temporarily overriding concerns about their precarious situation. Jax remained vigilant, his hand never far from his weapon, but his stance was less rigid than before, his gaze more curious than fearful. "So, he said after they had been walking for about an hour. Your theory about the Cavics being empathic, you think that's why the Persephone colonists had such a different experience? Mara carefully stepped over a cluster of what appeared to be carnivorous fungi. It would explain the discrepancy, she said. If the Cavics can sense emotions, perhaps even amplify or reflect them, then approaching them with fear and hostility would create a dangerous feedback loop. So the colonists feared the Cavics. The Cavics sensed that fear, and reflected it back, possibly amplified. Mara finished, making the colonists even more fearful and aggressive, which in turn, made the Cavics more fearful and aggressive. Jax concluded. A deadly spiral. Exactly. It's not unlike how predators on Earth can sense fear in their prey, but in this case, it's a much more direct, possibly even conscious mechanism. They fell silent as they pushed through a particularly dense section of undergrowth. When they emerged, they found themselves standing before the ruins of what had once been a human settlement. Persephone Outpost had clearly been designed with defense in mind, even in its ruined state. The remains of high walls, guard towers, and weapons emplacements were evident. Nature had reclaimed much of it. Vines with purple flowers crept up the walls, and small creatures darted in and out of collapsed structures, but the basic layout was still discernible. Home sweet home, Jax muttered, at least for the next few days. Artemis hesitated at the edge of the clearing, making a low, uncertain sound in her throat. Her bioluminescence pulsed in what Mara was beginning to recognize as patterns of distress. She doesn't like this place, Mara observed. Can't say I blame her. They approached the main gate, which hung partially open, its heavy metal frame twisted as if by enormous force. Jax examined the damage with a professional eye. Something tore through this, he said. Something strong. Cavics, Mara suggested, probably during what the reports called the Great Predator Uprising. Inside the perimeter, the signs of violence were even more evident. Scattered bones, human and otherwise, told a grim story of the outpost's final days. Equipment lay where it had fallen, weather-worn but still recognizable. Energy nets designed to trap large creatures. Neural dampeners that had likely been intended to subdue the Cavics. And more conventional weapons. They tried to fight, Jax said quietly. They tried to capture and control. And they failed, Mara added, her voice equally subdued. Because they approached Varkona as conquerors rather than visitors. They made their way to what appeared to have been the command center, a two-story structure at the heart of the outpost that had withstood the ravages of time better than the surrounding buildings. Inside, the air was stale but breathable, and the interior was largely intact. Power's out, obviously, Jax said, examining a dead console. But some of this equipment might be salvageable. If I can get the emergency generator running, we might be able to boost a distress signal. I'll check for supplies, Mara offered. Food, water purifiers, anything useful. Artemis had reluctantly followed them inside but seemed uncomfortable in the human structure. She paced nervously, her claws clicking on the metal flooring. Mara found her way to what had been the outpost's research lab. Like the rest of the facility, it showed signs of a hasty evacuation, or worse. Papers were scattered across workstations. Specimen containers lay broken on the floor, and a large examination table dominated the center of the room, complete with restraints suitable for a creature the size of a Cavics. They were experimenting on them, she said aloud, disgust evident in her voice. A terminal on one of the workstations caught her attention. Unlike most of the equipment in the outpost, this one had a soft blue light indicating backup power. Curious. Mara pressed a key, and the screen flickered to life. Jax, she called, I found something. He joined her moments later, wiping grease from his hands. What is it? A research log, Mara said, scrolling through the entries. From Dr. Eleanor Reeves, The outpost's xenobiologist. She continued reading, her expression growing increasingly troubled. They captured a juvenile cavix, were running tests on it. The log entries painted a disturbing picture of colonial arrogance and scientific overreach. Dr. Reeves had initially advocated for cautious observation of the cavix, noting their obvious intelligence and social structure, but the military commander of the outpost, a Colonel Vash, had overruled her concerns, insisting on a more aggressive approach to understanding and potentially weaponizing the creature's abilities. "Listen to this entry," Mara said. Reading aloud, Day 47. The juvenile specimen continues to exhibit remarkable empathic abilities. When exposed to recordings of human fear responses, its bioluminescence intensifies and it becomes agitated. Conversely, when exposed to calming stimuli, it becomes docile. Colonel Vash believes this confirms his theory that the cavix can be conditioned to respond to specific emotional triggers, potentially making them viable as military assets. I have expressed my ethical objections, but the Colonel remains convinced. Jax leaned closer to the screen. "Does it say what happened? Why the uprising occurred?" Mara scrolled further, finding the final entry. Day 63. Disaster. The adult cavix have somehow sensed the distress of our captive juvenile. They've been gathering outside the perimeter in unprecedented numbers. The neural dampeners are ineffective. It seems the creatures can communicate emotionally regardless of technological barriers. Colonel Vash has ordered the juvenile to be terminated as a security measure. Despite my protests, I fear this will only... The entry ended abruptly. "They killed the juvenile," Jack said quietly. "And the adults retaliated." "Not retaliated," Mara corrected. "They protected. They responded to a genuine threat." She looked up at him. "Just as they're protecting us now, because we approached them with curiosity rather than fear." A low rumble from Artemis drew their attention. The cavix was standing rigidly, her hide pulsing with rapid patterns of bioluminescence. Before either human could react, she turned and bolted from the command center. "Artemis," Mara called, hurrying after her. Outside. The cause of Artemis's distress became immediately apparent. The sky above the outpost was darkening, not with nightfall, but with an approaching storm. Lightning flashed between violet-tinged clouds, and the wind had picked up considerably. "We need to secure the command center," Jack said, eyeing the storm with concern. "These Varkonian electrical storms are legendary. Enough charge to fry unshielded electronics or unprotected humans." They worked quickly, closing and securing shutters over the windows and doors of the command center. Artemis had disappeared into the jungle, presumably to seek her own shelter from the approaching storm. "Will she be all right out there?" Jax asked, surprising Mara with his concern. "I think so," Mara replied. "The cavix evolved on this planet. They must have adaptations for its weather patterns." No sooner had they secured the final shutter than the storm broke over them with terrifying intensity. Lightning struck continuously, not in isolated bolts, but in sustained, writhing tendrils that connected clouds to ground in displays that would have been beautiful if they weren't so deadly. Thunder shook the very foundations of the outpost, and rain fell in sheets so dense they obscured visibility beyond a few meters. Inside the command center, emergency lights flickered on, the storm's electrical energy apparently activating long-dormant systems through induction. "That's not good," Jax muttered as consoles around them began to power up, displays showing static or corrupted data. A mechanical voice suddenly echoed through the facility. "Emergency protocols activated. Unidentified life forms detected. Initiating defense sequence Alpha." "Really not good," Jax amended, rushing to a central console. "The storms reactivated the automated defense systems. They think we're intruders." A high-pitched whine filled the air as weapons turrets emerged from hidden compartments in the walls and ceiling, their targeting systems locking onto the two humans. "Can you shut it down?" Mara asked. backing away from the nearest turret. "Working on it." Jax's fingers flew over the console, but the system seemed unresponsive to his commands. "The authentication protocols are still active. It wants a command-level authorization code." The turrets completed their activation sequence, barrels glowing with charged energy. "Target locked," the mechanical voice announced. "Firing in 3, 2. A massive crash interrupted the countdown as something smashed through one of the shuttered windows. Artemis tumbled into the command center, her hide pulsing with urgent patterns of bioluminescence. She scrambled to her feet and positioned herself between the humans and the nearest turret. "Artemis, no," Mara cried. The turret adjusted its aim, now targeting the Cavyx. "New threat identified. Priority target acquired." Before it could fire, another crash announced the arrival of a second Cavyx, the large, scarred one from the previous night. It immediately charged the turret, knocking it from its mounting with a powerful swipe of its clawed limb. More Cavyx poured through the broken window and a newly smashed door, at least a dozen, their combined bioluminescence filling the command center with pulsing, shifting light. They moved with coordinated precision, attacking the defense systems while carefully avoiding the humans. "They're saving us," Jax said in amazement. "They knew the defenses were activating." "They felt our fear," Mara corrected. "They responded to it." The Cavyx made short work of the automated turrets, tearing them from their mountings or crushing their barrels with powerful jaws. When the immediate threat was neutralized, they gathered in the center of the room, their hide lights pulsing in synchronized patterns that Mara was increasingly convinced represented communication. Artemis approached Mara and Jax, making a soft, trilling sound. The feeling of protective concern washed over Mara again, stronger than before. "Thank you," she said simply, placing her hand on Artemis's snout. The moment of connection was interrupted by a new sound, the distinctive roar of spacecraft engines penetrating even the cacophony of the storm. The Cavyx reacted instantly, their hide lights flashing in alarm patterns. "That's a shuttle," Jax exclaimed, moving to a partially functioning monitor. "Someone's picked up our distress beacon." Through the broken window, they could see a military-grade shuttle descending toward the outpost's landing pad, its thrusters fighting against the storm winds. It touched down roughly but intact, its boarding ramp extending even before the engines had fully powered down. "We're saved," Jax said, relief evident in his voice. But Mara felt a growing unease. The Cavyx were agitated, moving restlessly around the command center, some taking defensive positions near the entrances. Artemis pressed close to her side, making urgent vocalizations. "Something's wrong," Mara said. "They sense something we don't." Figures in environmental suits emerged from the shuttle, their outlines barely visible through the driving rain. As they approached the command center, the lead figure removed his helmet, revealing the weathered face of an older man with cold, calculating eyes. "That insignia," Jax whispered, pointing to the man's uniform. "Colonial Expeditionary Force, Special Projects Division." The man and his squad entered the command center, weapons raised. Upon seeing the Cavyx, they immediately formed a defensive perimeter, their aim unwavering despite the creature's non-aggressive stance. "Stand down," the man ordered Mara and Jax. "We'll handle the hostiles." "They're not hostile," Mara protested, stepping forward. "They saved our lives." The man regarded her with evident skepticism. "Dr. Mara Kane, I presume, and Scout Jax Ryland." When they nodded, he continued, "I'm Colonel Vash, commanding officer of the Artemis recovery mission." Mara and Jax exchanged a startled look. "Vash?" Jax repeated. "The same Colonel Vash who commanded Persephone Outpost?" "The very same," Vash confirmed, his expression hardening. "And I see the situation hasn't improved in the decade since I was forced to evacuate." He raised his weapon. "These creatures are a threat to human expansion. They cannot be reasoned with, only controlled or eliminated." You're wrong, Mara said firmly. The Kaviks are intelligent, empathic beings. They respond to our emotions. The uprising at Persephone happened because you captured and killed one of their young. Vash's eyes narrowed. You've been here. What? 2 days? I spent 3 years studying these monsters. They killed 200 of my people. After you provoked them, Jax interjected, surprising Mara with his support. We've read the logs. Colonel, we know what happened here. Artemis growled low in her throat. Sensing the rising tension, the other Kaviks followed suit, their hide lights pulsing in rapid, alarmed patterns. See? Vash said triumphantly. They're aggressive by nature, he gestured to his squad. Prepare to neutralize the hostiles. Non-lethal if possible. Headquarters wants specimens. No! Mara moved to stand beside Artemis, placing a protective hand on the creature's armored hide. I won't let you hurt them. Vash's expression darkened. This isn't a negotiation. Dr. Kane, step aside, or we'll consider you compromised by alien influence. Jack stepped forward, placing himself between Vash's squad and Mara. The doctor is right. Colonel, these creatures saved our lives. They defended us from the outpost's automated systems you left active. I might add, a fortunate coincidence. Vash dismissed. Or perhaps they were simply attacking the technology, not protecting you. It wasn't a coincidence, Mara insisted. They responded to our fear, our distress. They've been protecting us since we crashed. Vash's patience was visibly wearing thin. Last warning, step aside. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. The Kaviks were growling in unison now, their hide lights pulsing in synchronized patterns of warning. Vash's squad tightened their grips on their weapons, fingers hovering over triggers. In that critical moment, Mara made a decision. Instead of backing down, she closed her eyes and focused on projecting calm. She thought of peaceful moments, sunrises over alien worlds, the quiet hum of a research lab late at night, her daughter's laughter. She pushed away her fear, her anger at Vash, her concern for the Kaviks. In their place, she cultivated a sense of tranquility and compassion. Beside her, Artemis's growl softened, then ceased entirely. The Kaviks' hide lights shifted from rapid, alarmed pulses to slower, gentler patterns, one by one. The other Kaviks followed suit, their aggressive postures relaxing. Vash watched in undisguised amazement. What are you doing? He demanded. Showing you what you never understood, Mara replied, her voice steady. They mirror us, Colonel. They reflected your fear and aggression back at you 10 years ago, creating a cycle of violence that could only end in tragedy. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze directly. But they can reflect peace just as easily. To demonstrate her point, she stepped forward, approaching the nearest of Vash's squad. The soldier tensed, but Vash, curiosity overriding caution, signaled him to hold position. Mara gestured to Artemis, who approached with surprising grace for a creature of her size. Hold out your hand, Mara instructed the soldier. After a hesitant glance at Vash, who nodded reluctantly, the soldier extended his hand. Artemis gently pressed her snout against it, and the man's eyes widened behind his visor. What is that? He asked, his voice filled with wonder rather than fear. Empathic connection, Mara explained. They can sense and project emotions. Right now, she's showing you curiosity, maybe a bit of caution, but no hostility. One by one, the other soldiers experienced the same connection, their weapons gradually lowering as understanding replaced fear. Even Vash, after initial resistance, allowed Artemis to touch his outstretched hand. His expression remained guarded, but something in his eyes shifted, a crack in the armor of decades of prejudice. They mirrored our hate, Mara said quietly. So we fed them nothing but peace. Jax approached, standing at Mara's side. The Cavics aren't the monsters here, Colonel. They never were. They're just another intelligent species trying to survive on their home world. Vash withdrew his hand from Artemis, his internal conflict evident. Even if what you say is true, Dr. Kane, it doesn't change the fact that Varkona 7 has resources the Expansion Authority wants. Reconciliation with the native life forms was never the mission. Then change the mission, Mara challenged. Imagine the possibilities of alliance rather than subjugation. The Cavics understand this planet in ways we never could. They could be guides, partners in careful, sustainable resource extraction. The Expansion Authority won't just abandon their plans because these creatures have a neat empathic trick. Vash countered, but his tone lacked conviction. Then give us time to prove it can work. Mara pressed. Let us document the Cavics, study their social structure, their intelligence, their empathic abilities. Give us the chance to demonstrate that cooperation is possible. The storm outside had begun to abate, shafts of sunlight breaking through the clouds. One beam fell across Artemis, illuminating her bioluminescent hide in a spectrum of colors that seemed almost deliberately beautiful. Vash looked from the Cavics to the humans, then back again. Decades of military discipline warred with the evidence before his eyes. Finally, he sighed. I can give you 1 month, he said reluctantly. After that, the main extraction team arrives. If you haven't convinced them by then, he let the implication hang in the air. We'll convince them, Mara said with quiet confidence. The evacuation proceeded peacefully after that. Vash's squad set up a temporary base at the outpost, maintaining a cautious but non-aggressive stance toward the Cavics. For their part, the predators kept a respectful distance from the new human arrivals, though Artemis remained close to Mara and Jax. As technicians from the shuttle repaired the outpost's communications array, Mara began documenting everything she had observed about the Cavics, their social structure, their empathic abilities, their intelligence. Jax, to her surprise, proved an invaluable assistant, his military training giving him an eye for behavioral patterns she might have missed. You know, he said one evening as they watched Artemis interacting with her pack, I've been thinking about what you said, about your daughter believing that monsters are just creatures we don't understand. Mara nodded, the memory of Ellie bringing both pain and warmth. She would have loved this, seeing her theories validated. She was right, Jax said simply. Not just about the Cavics, but about... He hesitated, then continued, about the monsters inside us too. The fear, the aggression, the desire to control what we don't understand. Mara looked at him, seeing past the hardened exterior to the man who had lost his squad, who had carried that guilt across the stars. Those monsters respond to empathy too, she said gently. 3 weeks later, as the extraction team's arrival drew near, Mara and Jax stood on a ridge overlooking a remarkable sight. Below them, in a clearing near the outpost, Vash's soldiers were engaged in what could only be described as a peace ritual with the Cavics. The humans stood in a circle, hands extended, while the Cavics moved among them, touching each person briefly with their snouts, their hide lights pulsing in gentle, harmonious patterns. The exchange of emotion was visible even from a distance, tension melting from human shoulders, expressions of wonder replacing wariness. Will it be enough? Jax asked, watching the scene. To convince the Expansion Authority? I don't know, Mara admitted. But it's a start. Artemis, who had rarely left their side since the crash, made a soft, trilling sound beside them. Her wound had healed completely, leaving only a faint pattern in her bioluminescence that pulsed in time with her breathing. What do you think, old friend? Mara asked, stroking the Cavics' snout. Can our species learn to coexist? In response, Artemis pressed her forehead gently against Mara's, and a wave of emotion washed over her. Not just the now familiar sense of protective concern, but something deeper, more complex. Hope, perhaps, or faith in possibilities yet to unfold. As the twin suns of Varkona 7 began their descent toward the horizon, painting the jungle in hues of gold and amber, Mara found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She had come seeking to prove her daughter's theories, to find some meaning in Ellie's death by continuing her work. Instead, she had found something more profound, a new understanding of what it meant to truly communicate across the boundaries of species and experience. The Kavix had shown her that connection was possible even between beings who had evolved on different worlds, under different stars. "You know," Jax said, breaking the contemplative silence, "when the extraction team leaves, someone will need to stay behind, to continue this work, to build on what we've started." Mara smiled, already knowing her answer. "Is that an offer to extend your contract, Scout Ryland?" He returned her smile. The hardness that had defined him when they first crashed now softened by understanding. "Let's call it a career change. Xenobiologist's assistant has a nice ring to it." Below them, the peace ritual concluded. Humans and Kavix separating with what appeared to be mutual respect. Colonel Vash stood apart from his squad, watching the proceedings with an expression that suggested his world view was still adjusting to new realities. "What if every monster we fear is merely a mirror of our own hearts?" Mara murmured, giving voice to the thought that had been forming since their first day on Varkona. "Then we'd better work on our hearts," Jax replied simply. Artemis made a sound that might have been agreement, her hide lights pulsing in a pattern that Mara had come to associate with contentment. Together, the three of them, human, and Kavix, watched as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky above Varkona 7. In 2 days, the extraction team would arrive, bringing with them the weight of human expansion and the cold calculations of resource management. But they would also find something unexpected on this world that humans had labeled a death world. They would find a beginning rather than an ending, a bridge rather than a barrier. And perhaps, just perhaps, they would learn what Mara and Jax had learned, that the most dangerous predators weren't the ones with claws and teeth, but the fears we brought with us across the stars, as if sensing her thoughts. Artemis pressed close to Mara's side, her empathic presence radiating a simple truth that transcended language. On Varkona, as on Earth and all worlds where thinking beings dwelled, understanding began with the courage to see beyond fear. And in that understanding lay the seeds of a future neither species could achieve alone.